And there is so much humour day to day in the law. It's in the witnesses, it's in, as a barrister, you get back to chambers, as a solicitor, you're sitting around, chatting about your cases. There's just so many different aspects because, as Gary says, you're dealing with people in difficult situations, and that's professional detachment. Perhaps that's just an excuse for finding things funny that you shouldn't. But I genuinely think the way people can survive in such a serious job is by making light of the law. So, whether these came from that, I think it's more that there is, therefore, certainly at the bar, and I think it's definitely with the solicitors in personal injury that I did, there's a wry sense of humour about the whole thing, a real humour there that keeps it going. And I think with Baby Barrister, as it has in the past with things like Rumpole, and it goes way back, is sometimes they overflow into fictional characters. So Gary's very kindly read a couple of extracts from the book. There's different ones as to just picking out ones about legal life and ones, I suppose, that did reflect my experience. And this is one, it's called London Council. Maybe because you mentioned the dog as well, I'll do the dog one. But this one is where the busker goes to a provincial court. And I did used to find when you were a London barrister and you go off to the provinces, and what is that? It's the most patronising phrase in itself, but it was the provincial bar and the London bar. And they would get quite uptight sometimes. That, well, why have they given you the case? Why have and it's probably because the solicitor was based in London and the case happened to have been issued in Liverpool. So you got sent to Liverpool because they happened to know you, or maybe you were cheaper than them, even that they were sending you, whatever it was. But there was definitely a frisson there. So this is just to explain, if we're talking making that, that was definitely a real feeling, even though actually I found once you gave as good as you got generally outside of court, in terms of just banter, then you tended to get on with them swimmingly, was my experience. But anyway, this is London Council. So I went to court in Yorkshire today with the busker, who had managed to get me instructed as his junior. Always had to get Baby Barrister to go along with the busker, because I was never sure quite how to report it otherwise when it's this first-person kind of diary. His opponent, who I'll call Gruff, was an extremely patronising bully who spoke with a broad Yorkshire accent, something which it became clear he intended to wield against the busker in court. He introduced the case with, and you'll have to excuse, my parents are from Yorkshire, I was born in Lancashire originally, so excuse my attempt at a Yorkshire accent. Your Honour, we are privileged today to be graced with the presence of London Council. And not just any London Council either, Your Honour. For my very learned friend has even written a law book on the subject which lies before you. Now, again, I'd written books. You pick an obscure area of law, and I'd either written or written with people books to try and get my name out to bring in a practice. So I'd had that, and they were legitimately teasing me for that. The judge had a twinkle in his eye, or along those lines, and smiled back mischievously at Gruff and answered him in an equally broad accent, "Yes, Mr. Gruff, it is an honour indeed to have such esteemed counsel in this humble county court. Some might say, Your Honour," continued Gruff, "that bringing up such high-powered artillery for such a small case as this is the proverbial sledgehammer to crack a nut. Others might say that it reflects a lack of confidence by the defendant's solicitors in their own case, that they don't feel able to trust lowly and less qualified local counsel to conduct the proceedings on their behalf." He paused before going on. "But all I would say, Your Honour, is that this is a great opportunity for us all to learn a little more about an area of law which most of us who have practised in it for too many years to remember have always taken to be governed by good old-fashioned decent common sense." The judge was very much enjoying the grandstanding and kept giving indiscreet little chuckles in the direction of Gruff. Meanwhile, the busker sat through the performance as if he didn't have a care in the world. After Gruff had sat down, the judge said, "Well, Mr. Busker, that was quite an introduction." The busker stood up. Anyway, a little bit of background there. And he says, "Your Honour, it is indeed a rare treat to return to the county of my birth. Though when I mention birth without more, it would be to understate the suffering that my poor mother went through whilst being driven several hundred miles after going into labour on the off chance that one day I might be good enough to play for this great county at cricket, something at which I was a great disappointment to my parents. A county which has not only produced the likes of Fred Truman and Len Hutton, but leaders in all fields, politicians such as Wilson and Wilberforce, explorers like James Cook and Amy Johnson, and artists and writers such as David Hockney and Ted Hughes. Indeed, Your Honour, such is the depth of achievement that it might well be said that the men and women of this great county provide the golden thread through which the whole fabric of our nation has been woven. Yet there's one great and abiding sadness for all of those, such as myself, who are exiled from the county of their birth, that they're unable to do that which their ancestors have done before them, to breathe the fresh country air, to walk its beautiful dales and swim in its fast-flowing rivers and streams, but above all, Your Honour, to feel the warmth and sincerity of the people of this great county. With this, the busker looked over at Gruff. The only consolation is that on those occasions when we return, we get to experience that same warmth and sincerity in the welcome we receive. And it is this, above all, for which I offer my thanks to Mr. Gruff. The judge by this point was positively beaming at the busker, and this didn't really stop until the moment that he later delivered judgment in his favour, and finished with the words, "Mr. Busker forgot another great aspect of the Yorkshire character, which doesn't seem to have been lost on him, and that's a sharp wit and sense of humour. Whilst I can't comment on his cricketing ability, he does seem to have a great aptitude for hitting a sloppy ball exactly where it deserves to go, and that's straight out of ground," with which he stared pointedly at Gruff. So that's the first one. I'll perhaps hand over to Alex for one of